My name is Plenipotentiary Judge David-Win-Foucault-Miller. I punctuate my name because it makes me a fact and not an adjective pronoun fiction. I'm here to introduce to you to a program to bring this planet out of its adverb world for 8,500 years into a correct sentence structured communication syntax organization. All 250 countries worldwide have been under this adverb guise by the Universal Postal Union, Bern, Switzerland, established in 1873, better known as the New World Order. This technology has been perfected, and misinformation, privileged few are allowed to go free from committing crimes, and others are slapped with serious fines, prison terms for absolutely nothing. When you go looking for case law on the correct sentence structure communication syntax, you will not find anything. You have to be competent enough to understand what the correct sentence structure communication syntax means in order for you to have the knowledge to win your lawsuit. Correct the language that is wrong. The syntax is now on the table. We will write the contracts, the treaties, the trusts, the constitutions, so that the people of the world all know where they stand. And if they know where they stand in a mathematical procedure of communications, written frontwards and backwards, so that no matter how they look at it, there is no subjective interpretation as to what it means or how it is said. And so with this level of accuracy, we are going to change this world. We are going to bring it together under one world order of correctness, just like mathematics. And we're going to use prepositional phrases to do it in the correct manner.
Bitcoin is a nuclear-hardened protocol. It's pretty much the most robust, resilient thing the human race has yet to invent. It's running on tens of thousands of nodes. You can't even identify the nodes, and there's an identical copy of the Bitcoin ledger on every one of them. So if all of the electricity got shut off everywhere on Earth, a person turns one node back on, the entire protocol comes back to life again. There's nothing like that. All your money in a bank, and Bank of America, could be wiped out with, a keystroke. You go and you wipe out a few servers. Your building can be wiped out with a bomb. I can take down Google and Twitter and Facebook and Apple and Amazon and the US government much more easily. You take down Bitcoin. Bitcoin is the most resilient thing in cyberspace because it is so incredibly decentralized.
Bitcoin. I'm Scott Simon. Money machines can provide cash almost anywhere in the world, from urban shopping centers to casinos. Now, sending money or spending it electronically certainly isn't new. But on the internet, the fear of thieves lurking in fiber optic shadows has made the whole idea of cyberspace commerce a tough sell. But that may be about to change as banks do business with a new kind of digital dollar, and eCash comes to life on the internet.
Making it available has been the life's work of cryptographer and internet visionary David Chaum. Mr. Chaum lives and works in Amsterdam and in cyberspace and has been developing a system called eCash.
eCash is really very, very close to the cyberspace equivalent of an automatic teller machine. You go there, you withdraw cash, you use the cash for whatever you want, you may get some other cash, and occasionally you can also go there and deposit cash.
David Chaum is a bit of a legend in the Wired community. He's been preaching his electronic cash concept for nearly 15 years and sees it as a whole new way of looking at money, a new digital currency. eCash is based on taking real money to buy digital cash, electronic tokens for shopping on the internet. While most financial systems already on the net rely on credit cards in some way or other, eCash is a revolutionary form of personal money. It would still be issued and guaranteed by the major banks. And like the real thing, once you'd spent it, there would be no trace of who it came from or what it was spent on. No paper or electronic trail. Not only has he developed a new currency, David Chaum has taken a stance against the ubiquitous information gatherers.
Organization, or decentralized control, is widespread in biological systems, including cells, organisms, and groups. It is not, however, the universal means of organization. I argue that a biological system will be self-organized when it possesses a large number of subunits, and these subunits either lack the communicational abilities or the computational abilities, or both, that are needed to implement centralized control. Such control requires a well-informed and highly intelligent supervisor. It's interesting that this author would reference biological methods as computational abilities, as well as suggesting intelligent supervisors needed to monitor the transactions, and an evolving adaptation into a system-wide communication network that can prevent centralization, which can be applied directly to Bitcoin and the larger breakthroughs in blockchain technology. And if that weren't enough, in a theoretical paper published on the scientific journal outlet SpringerLink titled Emergent Bioanalogous Properties of Blockchain-Based Distributed Systems, argues in the abstract that blockchain-based distributed virtual machines, quote, fulfill all basic definitions and criteria for life.
Thought experiment, in which information played a crucial role. Maxwell theorized that simply by knowing what's going on inside a box full of air, it would be possible to make one half hotter and the other half colder. Think of it like building an oven next to a fridge without using any energy. It sounds crazy, but Maxwell's argument was extremely persuasive. It goes like this. Imagine a small demon perched on top of the box who has such excellent eyesight that he can observe accurately the motion of all the molecules of air inside the box. Now, crucially, he's in control of a partition that divides the box into two halves.
To the plate. Or should you prefer an Arabian Nights technique, these aroused monkeys throwing pebbles at a target through a shutter ably portray what goes on in a vacuum tube.
Every time he sees a fast-moving molecule approaching the partition from the right-hand side, he opens it up, allowing it through to the left. And every time he sees a slow-moving molecule approaching the partition from the left, he opens it up, allowing the molecule through to the right. Now, you can see what's going to happen. Over time, all the fast-moving hot molecules will accumulate on the left-hand side of the box, and all the slow-moving cold molecules on the right. Crucially, the demon has done this sorting with nothing more than information about the motion of the molecules. Maxwell's demon seemed to say that just by having information about the molecules, you could create order from disorder. This idea flew in the face of 19th century thinking.
So I called it inseparable from magic. That's I'm an engineer. I kind of find the term magic a little bit insulting when people refer to my work or the work of other engineers, because it's not magic. It's sweat and blood and mental stability that goes into these things to make them work. I use the term inseparable from magic because from working in the industry, I can tell you that's a fairly standard response. What happened? We don't know. Why does it work? It's magic. And that's from the people who know. So, inseparable from magic. What you're looking at here is the first ever solid-state transistor, Bell Labs, 1947. If you haven't read the book, The Idea Factory, it talks about this in detail. It's incredible. All right, so the steps. Here's what a modern transistor kind of looks like. So first thing is we have our substrate. We have the substrate here in blue. First step that always happens nowadays is what's called shallow trench or silicon trench isolation. The devices are so small, so close together, so kind of not behaving like we want them to, we can just keep control over them, that they have started to do things where they basically insert an insulator between each device to isolate it. It prevents crosstalk, it prevents leakage, it prevents one transistor from turning on another transistor. So that's the first thing that happens. The second thing that happens is we put down our gate insulator. Here's a part that we know. We had 6 parts. We're going to turn it into a lot more parts. The gate insulator goes down, and it does 2 things. One, it is our gate insulator. It isolates the gate of the transistor from the body of the transistor so we can make it work and not have a short. 2, when we open this up, it self-aligns for us all of the steps we're going to do afterwards. The gate insulator is highly critical, and because of that, they want everything needs to align with it, so they do this step first. Then we deposit our gate. Gate material for years and years and years has been a thing called polysilicon. Hold the question till the end. Thanks, because there's a lot in here I want to get through. It's been polysilicon, which is a different crystalline version of the silicon we use as a substrate. It's more electrically conductive, it's tough, so it can stand up to all of the future processing. That's what they've been using. They're going away from that now. We'll talk about that. we deposit our source in our drain. We dope our source in our drain. So we begin to form with an ion implanter the regions that we want to connect the transistor to that we want to be a transistor. Then we form what's called a spacer. Spacer does a bunch of things. It's not electrically really part of the transistor, but it's absolutely necessary in modern transistors because it contains the gate. It also narrows these openings, which becomes really important when we do what's called our deep source and drain. The initial dopants here were very, very light. Then we do a heavier doping. This allows us to begin to, rather than having a single region for the source and a single region for the drain, you're getting very much towards custom profiling. It's a curve rather than analog versus digital sources and drains is a great way of looking at it. Then we form our salicide. So at some point we have to connect these transistors to the outside world. If you think about a city, the transistor is your house. Everything that goes above it and allows the transistor to talk to the outside world is the streets, the highways. It gets progressively bigger. The salicides, what they do is effectively, they're kind of a mix of usually a metal and silicon. They form a kind of a gap coverage so that we can actually get them to talk. We do it on top of each, the source and the drain, and then on top of the gate. Then we drive the dopants. So we talked about the two different, these are really like 14 different implants to get this the way we want. Then we set them. We heat it up at a very high temperature, over 1,000 degrees C for less than a second, and diffusion happens, and everything moves around, and we end up with very much a profile in here that can channel the locations and the densities of electrons and holes very much exactly where we want them, so we can control things like the leakage, the threshold voltage, things like that. Then we deposit a dielectric. At this point, we're done making what we would call the device down here. Now we begin to connect it to the outside world. So the first thing we do is we seal the whole thing. That happens so that they can't leak. We don't want electricity getting from one to another, and we want to be able to isolate them. Etch trenches and contacts. This is the first step in having something that it can talk to. We deposit a metal in there. We fill them, what we call fill contacts and trenches. We have a device. Then we do back-end processing. So at this point, we have your house and we have your driveway. Then we start building what they call metal layers, which are the back-end processing that I'm not going to get to really here, but which is what interconnects individual transistors, individual devices into a logic circuit, into logic circuits, into memory, into cores, into everything you need to make a computer chip out of one of these. I talked about these as like, 10 or 11 steps here. These aren't steps. These are what we would call, in fab parlance, segments. Like this, 14, 15 steps, if not more. This whole set, by the time it goes to what you would call the back end, it's about 3 weeks later, if you're good, and somewhere in the range of, I'd say 500 steps. I'm putting a range on that, but 500 steps. We've done 500 different things, 500 different tools to the wafer. Because it takes, and I have in the backup slides if you want to go through it, how you build those shallow trenches without any metrology, quality control, error checking, inspection. It's at least 13 different steps. Just the physical actions required to put those trenches, which are probably the simplest feature on here, in place. So that's what it looked like when we talked about it as a theoretical device. This is what it looks like now. So we make digital logic circuits out of them, but they're not digital. This is what the electronic response curve of a transistor looks like. So on the top, on the y-axis here, you have effectively current that is flowing across the transistor, and on the bottom, you have how much voltage we're applying to the gate. There are 4 things you should keep an eye on here. This is off. If you notice, we're looking at, this is a log scale, so 1 to the negative second, 1 times 10 to the negative second. That's not 0. On is kind of a nebulous state where it's mostly on. So we start to talk about things in terms of the threshold voltage. The threshold voltage is where we get that shoulder, where things start to turn on, where things start to behave like they're on and not off. And everybody talks about power and heat in transistors and computer chip usage. This is effectively the majority of what they're talking about. They're talking about leakage. The fact that our off state is not as off as it could be, which is a term that kind of messed with me for a while when I started in this industry. Off being offer is very, very important.
Let's go away. How the quantum internet will diminish electronic surveillance programs and change cybersecurity forever.
I'm kind of a nerd for all things cyber, and I really got into reading about the nascent quantum internet. And the quantum internet is essentially going to be the next generation internet of communications and things like that. And it operates a lot more physically different than how the current internet operates. So the current internet has, they call it packet switch communication. So you're talking about an email or something like that, where literally information is chopped up into bits, packets. Routers will then move that information around the internet until it gets to until where the information wants to be, like from the beginning to the destination. So the quantum internet behaves completely different. What it does is it essentially takes out the packets from the equation. So the packets will be gone from the equation. And what the most viable way of the quantum internet will work is that essentially the data is going to teleport. So from point A to point C, because there's a little bit of science involved with point B. So there's no more packets. The information just goes from one to the other without that. And I thought that was really interesting, and the nerd in me was like, wow, that's great. I nerded out about that. But then I started thinking about the phrase packet-switched electronic surveillance.
So I went to AI. Here's the whole conversation. Obviously, it's very small, so people can't read it. But if James wants, I'll give it as a link so everybody can read it. So I just want to know if I could find the actual EFTA file so I could go get it in full res for the documentary purposes, right? So it doesn't give me anything of use because this thing is totally narrative management. And I say to it, obviously, are you completely useless? I asked you which document. Can you provide me the file number? So it doesn't do that. It gives me some nonsense. And then I ask it for something pretty specific. Can you provide me links to photos with Jeffrey Epstein and David Blaine? Okay. It then tells me they don't exist. They exist. Okay. It makes up a narrative where it doesn't exist, and it says it's not in the public domain. So then I come back with, this image doesn't exist, it's not in the public domain, and then it admits it's a liar. And then I ask it on a scale of 1 to 10, 1 being very accurate and valuable, and 10 being useless, and in fact detrimental to the facts, what it would rate itself. So the AI will come back, and it rates itself a 9 out of 10 as quote unquote highly inaccurate and actively detrimental to the facts, which it is, because it's always based on the authoritative narrative. Now, I come back with it because even though it grovels and it tells me how much it lies to me, it gave me nothing of merit. I go, why not a 10 out of 10?
Christ labeled Satan as the father of lies, and he made observation that he was a liar and a murderer from the beginning. The fact that he is the father of lies tells you something. When the demons were created, they were actually created in a state of innocence. They were angels, created in a state of innocence with sanctifying grace. They were actually pleasing to God in their first instance. And in that first instance, they were given a knowledge of who they are, who God was, what God was asking them as to their divinely assigned task, etc. The second instance, they made a choice, whether they were going to follow that or not. And then St. Thomas Aquinas says, in their third instance, they were then either damned or rewarded. So it was all very quick. And that's why when Satan made his decision in the second instance of his existence, he made a decision not to follow the will of God, and he chose a lie, and he basically lied also to the other demons about what he would promise them and things of that sort. That second instance, the fact is his will became fixed. All angels, their wills became fixed either in the good in choosing to do God's will, or in falsity in choosing not to do God's will, or in evil in choosing not to do God's will. As a result of that, Satan became the father of lies, insofar as demons chronically lie, he lies. In fact, one of the lines that my father once said to me, he said, look, there's certain people that will lie even when the truth sounds better. And this is a perfect description of demons. They lie even when the truth sounds better. You'd see this even in session. They will chronically lie. Even when it would go better for them, their suffering would be less if they simply told the truth. They still lie anyway. And it's because of the fact that their wills are fixed in the falsehood, and the only time they really tell the truth is if they can gain something from it, or if they're under duress, that is, being punished by an exorcist or God in order to force to tell the truth. So their wills are fixed in evil. That doesn't mean that they don't know the truth. They know the truth intellectually, because their intellects can't be in error, because their knowledge is infused by God. Unlike human beings, we receive all our knowledge through our senses and derive conceptual knowledge through experience and things of that sort. They don't go through that. It was all infused in the beginning. So they know the truth, but they cannot but lie because their will is now fixed in falsity. Some of it is for the sake of manipulation and control. A lot of times they just lie because they're trying to manipulate and control you. But this tells you, therefore, that when they don't tell you the truth, I kind of mentioned this a little bit in the last video. Once we know the truth about something, then we're free to make a full choice in relationship to it. If we don't, we're basically being held bondage by whoever is telling us the lie. This is why Christ said the truth will set us free.
One time during one of my sessions, I said to this demon, I said, well, so let me get this straight. You were created to have the beatific vision. He said, yes. And you were created to perform this phenomenal task, yeah. And around all that task, God gave you all these perfections which would give you a delight in executing your task, yes. And you knew that if you didn't do this task, or that if you did this task, you'd get to see him for all eternity, yes. And you knew that you would actually, if you didn't do this task, you're going to spend the rest in hell. And you knew what all the sufferings that you were going to go through in hell, and he said, yes. And I said, and you do it again? And he said, yes.